when justice learns to listen and truth learns to speak. At the start of the new democracy, I stood at a crossroads between humanity and law. I had defended many people in criminal trials during this turbulent era, and I guided the broken thereafter. And I watched forgiveness replace anger. I watched a nation heal by choosing compassion over condemnation. I was fortunate to be part of the first democratic elections in South Africa in 1994 as a senior legal officer in the IEC. The world were watching us. The country was full of hope for a brighter future. It was so exciting. But with that excitement was a recognition of the hurt that had gone before. And that gave birth to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that many of you may have heard of. It was at that stage that I replaced evidence and verdicts in court with truth, forgiveness, and amnesty applications. Many of my clients were despised persons who'd been involved in atrocities during those early years and had an opportunity to apply for amnesty before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. My task was to advise them legally, to assist them emotionally, to facilitate their confession, to hear the raw truth, to encourage the apology, to seek the forgiveness with them, and let them understand what was required of them. This was a very tough time. I witnessed people who came to me that were emotionally shattered, guilt-ridden, carrying heavy burdens, broken. And I heard truths that sometimes I could not even imagine existed. But my job was not to judge. My job was to ensure that they received a fair hearing and that they were properly prepared for their amnesty applications. The one thing that was very difficult to prepare them for was the rebuke that they would suffer at the hands of those individuals who had lost loved ones, who had felt the pain, and the public that found it hard to stomach or forgive those that were giving the truth that they wanted to hear, but in the same breath didn't want to hear. Those hearings were incredibly emotionally draining on everybody concerned. The commissioners, those of us that had applicants there, the public, and the families of the loved ones. The grief was so palpable. There was crying. There were people collapsing. It was just an emotional roller coaster, and it was incredibly difficult to keep composure during all of this that carried on. It was really hard. but necessary. I can remember wishing for just one wish, that I could make it all go away, that I could heal everybody, that there'd be no more pain, that it could be over, that the reconciliation could just take place instantly. But it couldn't. It was a process. It was a process that we all had to go through. It was necessary. I can remember keeping myself together during those hearings, but getting into my car and letting my emotions run. It was a way of dealing with it, I think. But there was a stage where people found it difficult to divorce the defended from the defender. And so, to a large extent, those of us that defended or assisted those that were seeking amnesty were ostracized to some extent. And that was also hard, especially as a young advocate. It was difficult. But that was the task that I had at that stage. The media was all over many of my clients because they were despised people. And after one hearing particularly, I was not comfortable with the way that the commissioners had dealt with my client. And I happened to mention that in the earshot of the media, who of course wanted to make a field day out of that and debate it in the press. And I responded that I was not prepared to have this debate in the press. And the only person that I would discuss it with would be the Archbishop Desmond Tutu himself. A couple of days after that, I received a call from the Archbishop's office and an airplane ticket to go and have a private meeting with him. Well, you can imagine my shock, but nonetheless, I went and I had a private audience with Bishop Desmond Tutu, the highlight of my career. We spoke in private about compassion, forgiveness, accountability, reconciliation, the aims and objectives of the Commission. It was an amazing experience. And I learned a very valuable lesson that day. I learned that leadership is accountable. But it doesn't have to have a loud voice to show purpose. He rebuked his commissioners gently, as a true leader would have. And I think that leadership lesson that I learned that day has carried through my life with me. Many years later, my young daughter was studying about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission at school. And I, of course, was imparting some of that which I'd experienced. And she retorted to me that, "Mom, you can't just make up stories about this. Sir says we have to reference. What would my reference be?" And I said, "I'm the reference." She said, "What do you mean?" And I explained to her that I'd been part of the Truth Commission. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, you were part of history." And it dawned on me that day that I had been part of history and a very important facet of my history. How privileged was I? You know, I've thought after as to what I would say to my younger self, having gone through that experience. What would I have said to me? And I think I would have said, "You kept strong. You kept your ethics intact. You learned about faith. And faith is truth and justice. where truth and justice interface. That is where healing can begin. And I think that that is what I've always carried in my life after that. Where healing can begin. Where there's faith, where there's justice, and where they interface. It's been such a pleasure to share this pause with you today. Remember, your voice matters. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell for the next Tea Adjournment.